Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to my favourite 25 films of the 1960s. Now again, if you've been following this series, this is my favourite 25. This is not the 25 films that I believe to be the greatest of the 60s. So if there's omissions, then maybe you could do your own list in the comments below. There will be films in here that you'll go, what? Why is that in there? And vice versa. Why isn't a classic from the 60s not included in this list? And that's just because it's favourites, not what I think is the best. So this is actually a bit of a mix of non-English language and English language. If you're familiar with the channel, some of these choices you'll be able to guess, but there might be some surprises along the way. I've enjoyed your comments and your lists so far in this series, so let's keep it going. And we'll start with number 25, Billy Wilder's The Apartment. This is the nice hardback edition from Arrow Academy, if you remember Arrow Academy used to exist. And this has writings and lots of lovely pictures. Now I never used to be a huge fan of this. I preferred other Billy Wilders, and perhaps I still do, Ace in the Hole and The Long Weekend, Lost Weekend even. But if you actually take away the comedy, as with most Billy Wilder comedies, it's not that far from tragedy. And this really is more about how bosses exploit their workers. Obviously Fred MacMurray is usually a kind of nice guy, and on the surface he's a nice guy, but in actual fact he's just a sleazebag in this film. And Jack Lemmon is the put upon employee who happens to have a flat, and he gets manipulated and coerced with promises of future success in the company if he basically gives his flat up on several nights for cheating husbands who just happen to be superior to him in his company. And one of these women who are just kind of used and abused is Shirley MacLaine, and again she's exploited and used by the higher ups. So yes, you know, people call it a lovely romance, and obviously the last scene's iconic, the same way that the last line in Some Like It Hot is fairly iconic. But underneath the surface, it's a festering boil of adultery and exploitation and manipulation, and obviously that's why I like it. Number 24, in the argument for the best prison film of all time, Jacques Becker's La True. Sadly, this was Jacques Becker's last film. You can add him to the list of filmmakers that died too young. This and Bresson's A Man Escaped are probably in that argument. This is based on a true story from 1947 in France, strangely enough. A young man is put in prison. Whether he's guilty or not is up for debate. And he's put in a cell with a bunch of hardcore prisoners who are attempting an escape, and they don't know whether to include him in the ploy or not. But this film really goes into the banality and the day-to-day of actually trying to escape. It's not, oh, we're trying to escape, and then they dig the tunnel for a wee while, and then, oh, that's them escaped. This goes into the minute detail of the routine of prison and the routine of trying to construct a tunnel while in prison. It's wonderfully bleak and realistic. Again, there's not a lot of kind of cutting and editing while they're doing their work. You do, as an audience, feel the tediousness of it and feel like you're somehow helping them tunnel. As again, the kind of minute detail of it. It has a wonderful ending. Whether they get out or not, you'll have to watch the film. But it's another wonderful Jack Becker who is really underrated, and again, because he did all kinds of different films, perhaps he hasn't had the recognition as he probably deserves as far as great French directors or great directors in general. And as always with quite a lot of these vintage world cinema French releases, there's a wonderful bit by Jeanette von Sandu. So that's Le Trou at 24. At 23, a film that was recommended to me by a good friend John Sayles, who, while he was in the Criterion cupboard, and if you haven't seen the John Sayles in the Criterion cupboard, I highly recommend it. But he picked out this film from 1963 by Mario Monicelli, and it's The Organizer. Strange enough, available on Criterion. Spine number 610, and this is a Region A. This stars Marcello Mastroianni, but not the usual suave, womanising Marcello Mastroianni. In this, he has a scruffy beard, and all his clothes are kind of crumpled. He wears glasses. He's a kind of a travelling professor who gets involved in kind of union squabbles all over Italy. This is early 20th century Turin, a textile factory, and he gets involved in a union fight. It's wonderful. It has a bit of everything. You get to know the characters. Again, there's plenty of that north-south divide that I only really noticed in Italian films, the more Italian films you watch, the 60s and 70s. It's funny, it's moving, it's infuriating. You love these people, you get frustrated with these people. Again, it doesn't, very much like Paul Schrader's Blue Collar, it doesn't shy away from the brutality and the honesty of the situation, and it masterfully kind of moves between tones from, as I said, from comedy to tragedy, very well. And Mastroianni, it's a different side to Mastroianni, but he's absolutely fantastic in it, as is all the cast. So I would highly recommend The Organizer if you haven't seen it. And now number 22 from 1968, my favourite Hammer film, always has been, even though it's certainly not perfect. And again, this list is not the greatest 25 films of the 60s in my opinion, even though my opinion is not fact. It's The Devil Rides Out. Again, far from perfect, but I've always loved it. I mean, Christopher Lee as the hero, even though he is a bit of a git, as he is trying to save a young friend, or the son of a young friend, from a satanic cult led by Charles Gray. The wonderful Paul Eddington is in it. It's just wonderful. Yes, the effects at the end of the film aren't great. They didn't quite have the money to finish them. But again, just the atmosphere of it, the creepiness of it. And again, Charles Gray with a seminal performance. I've always had a soft spot for The Devil Rides Out. And I'll always have a soft spot for The Devil Rides Out. Number 21. A film I go on about ad nauseum in the channel, so I won't really talk about it too much. It's Roger Corman's The Man with the X-Ray Eyes with Ray Milland. Again, Ray Milland has said that his two favourite films that he was in is The Man with the X-Ray Eyes and Lost Weekend with Billy Wilder. Bizarrely, you know, this Second Sight hardback edition has been out probably since about 2016, and it's still available on their website. So please, if you fancy a lovely edition of it, go to the Second Sight website, because it's still available. I mean, quite a lot of their special editions sell out, you know, within weeks. But The Man with X-Ray Eyes, despite it being absolutely brilliant, nobody seems to want to buy it, which is ridiculous. Number 20, one of those films that I saw on BBC Two decades ago and always stuck with me, by another underappreciated filmmaker, Georges Franju's Les Yeux Sans Visage, or Eyes Without a Face. Just a beautiful, poetic, I guess you could call it, horror film. Fairly iconic. Edith Scobe is the daughter of a professor, played by Pierre Brasseur, who in a car accident he disfigures her. So with the help of the wonderful Lida Valli, yes, that Lida Valli, they trap and kill young women and put their faces on Edith Scobe in the hope to transform her and give her back her face, or a face. This BFI edition is stacked. I'm waiting on a French 4K. It's just beautiful imagery. It goes at a fairly slow pace that helps reduce your heartbeat. It's a very trance-like film, very poetic. And again, Edith Scobe wandering about with her featureless mask, surrounded by birds and dogs, is quite beautiful. And this actually has... Does this have Blood of the Beasts? His Franju's wonderful abattoir documentary. I'm not actually sure it does. But that's certainly well worth seeing, as is Jude X and La Nuit Rouge as well. It's that Eyes Without a Face. Number 19, an absolute classic from 1967. This is Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai, which I have on Criterion DVD and Criterion Blu-ray. And guess what? I'll be getting it on Criterion 4K as well. It's always been my favourite Melville, even though that has now been overtaken by something else, which may or may not be on this list as well. Alain Delon, who has looked cool in quite a lot of films, but he looks even cooler in Le Samurai, as Jeff Costello, a hitman who lives with a little bird in a cage. It's one of the classic Man and His Room films. Obviously Taxi Driver is in that genre of film, but this is different class to Taxi Driver, as good as Taxi Driver is. Just existential, very zen, lovely grey palette that Melville uses, and just seminal stuff. I think I've said seminal quite a lot. Number 18, another one of these films that I saw late night. I think this was Channel 4 with adverts, which I eventually cut out when I illegally recorded onto VHS so many years ago. One of those films, the first time you see it, it's like, did I actually dream this, or is it real? It's of course Last Year in Marienbad by Alain Resnais. I've said it before and I'll say it again, arguably the greatest edited film of all time. The scenes where Delphine Seyrig is in a room and she'll literally just turn her head and she'll be in another room. To me, this is one of those films that you can pretty much make up what it means, and 10 people could have 10 different readings of it. I like to think that all these guests in this big house in the middle of the country, they're all actually dead, and they just spend their time vacuously having conversations and playing little games and talking complete nonsense to each other. It's one of the films about time, it's about death, it's science fiction, it's a attack on the bourgeoisie. It's pretty much anything you want it to be. I mean, this could really do a 4K because it's just stunning black and white. Again, this one has an interview with Jeanette Van Sandu, and there's a couple of shorts by Resnais on it as well. Yeah, just a phenomenal film, even although it might be complete twaddle. Lots of films from the 60s from this filmmaker could get on it, but I've went for 1964's Charulata by Satyajit Ray. This is a perfect example of a film where nothing really happens. It's really just about Sumitra Chatterjee, Satyajit Ray's go-to actor, and he plays a sort of poet who comes and stays with his cousin and his cousin's wife, Charulata, played by Madhuri Mukherjee, because the husband is too busy running his newspaper to give her any time, and the pair of them just kind of hang out and get to know each other. There's a great moment on a swing, one of the great swing scenes. Again, nothing much happens apart from two people getting to know each other, and it's just absolutely sublime. Again, we still need more Satyajit Ray on Blu-ray, or even on DVD, because there's a lot of these films that you just cannot see on physical media, at least. I know the Criterion Channel every now and again shows these films. Obviously the Apu trilogy got a 4K release, but we're getting there, but we need more, thanks very much. But Charulata, I could have picked plenty of other ones, but there's just something about that film that always puts a smile on my face. Next, a filmmaker that could have quite a few on this list, but I think this is the only one that actually made it onto the 60s. It's probably not the one that other people would put onto the 60s, but from 1961, this is Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly, with Harriet Andersson, the often forgotten one of Bergman's female actors, Gunnar Bjornstrand, Max von Sydow. It's just a four-hander on a beautiful little island, and it's about madness and mental health, and it's just absolutely sublime. Again, one of the things that Bergman doesn't get credit for enough is his framing and shot composition, and the shot composition through a glass darkly is absolutely stunning. I mean, Winter Light could have almost been in this list as well. Obviously more people would probably pick The Silence, but I actually prefer these two to The Silence, but that's just me. But I'm going to go with Through a Glass Darkly, a quietly devastating little film. At number 15, there is a 4K steelbook that's extortionate, and for some reason there hasn't been a standard 4K, even though it's sort of brother in arms. The Bridge of the River Kwai's got a 4K. It's Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, if there's a film that was made for 4K, it's Lawrence of Arabia. Yes, its second half could actually be shorter, but what a spectacle. And again, this is a film that will satisfy different people. If you're a fan of history or war films, you should get something out of this. If you're a fan of kind of psychological portraits of somebody, there should be something in this for you as well. It's the kind of psychological stuff that I just love, even from the simple, putting out a match with his fingers, and somebody else tries it and goes, that bleeding well hurts, and Lawrence, played by Peter O'Toole of course, says of course it hurts, and the guy says, well, what's the trick? And Lawrence said the trick is not to mind that it hurts, and that pretty much gives you a little view into his mind that's kind of amplified through the film. Yeah, they don't make films like that anymore, and this is certainly an example of films that just don't make anymore. The image of all these people out sweeping the desert and brushing it over so they could go for a second take. I mean, obviously nowadays this would just be all CG. It's a stunning achievement, even if every time you watch it the second half kind of does drag somewhat. Lawrence of Arabia. Again, this is a controversial choice as far as maybe the ranking, but again, this is just personal taste. From 1968, 2001, A Space Odyssey. I think Kubrick could have had a little bit less monkeys, but that's just me. I know I'll get buried in the comments for that, but a little bit less monkey. You have to remember, the first time I saw this, I think I caught it halfway through. It was on, I think, a 14-inch black and white television. I was maybe 10 or something, so strangely enough it confused me, especially the scenes with different versions of Care Dulia. So I was a little bit confused. It's amazing, it's 1968 and nobody's really surpassed the sense of awe in space or of space. Nobody's bettered the special effects. The circular jogging scene still blows my mind, even though I know how they did it, but that's the magic of cinema. It still blows my mind every time I see it. Yeah, I used to love it, and then I kind of fell out of love with it. But it's just an amazing achievement, and again, 1968, and it's still never been surpassed, really. I know Christopher Nolan super fans might disagree. Or Christopher Nolan's only fans. Is there a difference? I'm not quite sure. Number 13, from 1962, arguably my favourite Orson Welles film, The Trial. This is in 4K. Every Orson Welles film should be in 4K. It's like every Michael Pelham Pressburger film should be in 4K. That should be the law. Every Orson Welles film should be in 4K. I just love The Trial, always have. The beginning, that little pin drawing, that just sums up not just the film, not just Kafka's story. That first 5-minute little pin introduction sums up life, really. I think Orson Welles and mixture of Kafka sums up life in this film. You're guilty of something and you get punished for something even though you don't even know what it is. That's basically life. Anthony Perkins' finest work. Forget that film he did in 1960. Just absolutely beautiful. Shot in Europe, so it's full of like ravaged architecture. It's just so good. Little cameos pop up. Orson Welles himself. Yeah, it might not make sense. It might have you scratching your head. But again, it's life. I mean, it's called a trial, but it could just be called life. It makes no sense, and you're screwed. Anyway, from 1968, the same year as maybe my number one film, a spaghetti western that doesn't look like a spaghetti western. It's Sergio Corbucci's finest film, not Django, The Great Silence, with Klaus Kinski and Jean-Louis Trintignant. And it doesn't look like a normal western because it's snowbound. There's not many westerns that are snowbound. A score by Ennio Morricone. It has a hero that's mute. Again, not really a western trope. I know heroes in spaghetti westerns tend to be like silent and not say much, taciturn. But Jean-Louis Trintignant, who's obviously more famous for art house films, if you want to use that term, he plays the mute. It has a beautiful ending, one of the great endings of all time. Clint Eastwood allegedly bought the rights to make it, and he was going to play the hero, but obviously that didn't really work out because I'm not sure studios would want Clint Eastwood to be silent throughout the whole film, and they certainly weren't going to reproduce the ending. Yeah, lots of familiar faces: Luigi Pistelli, Frank Wolff, Vanetta McGee, who's in plenty of blaxploitation films. She turns up as well. It's just really unusual for a western, but it's absolutely brilliant. Loosely based on fact. Excuse me. Loosely based on fact. But it's just fantastic. And I know Masters of Cinema Eureka released a version as well. And it looks the best it's ever looked. Number 11. Masaki Kobayashi's Harakiri. I mean, I do need to rewatch it. It's been a wee while because I've been obsessed with seeing as many Kobayashis as I can, because he's rocketed up my big board of directors. Tatsuya Nakadai, again, in the leading role, and this has a go at the Bushido and the whole samurai code and the kind of needless death of people just to save face, or it's just shot absolutely beautifully. Masterful performances, a masterful message, and just another great Kobayashi film. And I haven't seen one that's less than really, really good. So that's Harakiri from 1962. And number 10, a film for me that is just one of those experiences. It's kind of life before seeing this film and life afterwards. But you have to make sure your eyeballs are prepared for Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace, because this is one of the most beautiful films ever made. I think they've banned any possibility of having 4K because they don't want people's eyeballs streaming down their face, because the levels of gorgeosity. If it wasn't for King Vidor's version of War and Peace with Henry Fonda and Audrey Hepburn, Russia and Bondarchuk would never have made this, because they wanted to say, well, we'll do it properly. So this, over 2 years, it's 422 minutes long. Bondarchuk, I think, had like 2 heart attacks while making it. They literally built half of, well, maybe not half of Moscow, that's maybe a bit hyperbolic, and then burnt it to the ground for the last third of the film. It is just stunning. Almost every frame looks like one of those Napoleonic paintings that take up a gallery wall. It's just absolutely stunning. I was agog for at least 378 minutes out of the 422 minutes. It's literally just look at that shot, look at that shot, look at that shot, look at that shot. Bondarchuk plays one of the main 3 characters as well. It's just a ridiculous piece of cinema that will never be repeated. I mean, the government let them open, I think it was 57 museums, and take stuff out of it for production design, because they wanted to make it as accurate as possible. There's even a scene with a bear getting drunk. I mean, it is just absolutely ludicrous. It is completely demented how one man, well, not just one man, but one man directed this, obviously went insane and had heart attacks while making it. You know, there's 2 documentaries from 1966 and 1969 about the making of the film. You know, there's interviews with cinematographers. It's just absolutely nuts. But it is what cinema is. It is cinema, and cinema is it. At number 9, fairly predictable pick. Again, it's not a perfect film, but it's just about. It's Kubrick again, and this is 1962's Doctor Strangelove. Don't really need to say much about it. Obviously, I'm not a huge George C. Scott fan, but he's in this, as is James Earl Jones. Number 8, I'll probably get laughed at by saying this is my favourite Tarkovsky, because this is his mainstream short one from 1962. This is Ivan's Childhood. Absolutely beautiful, brutal, bleak, and absolutely wonderful. Images galore. Again, water and forests. It's Tarkovsky. Just shot composition, images to die for, images that just get burned in your imagination. Again, it's not one of his 2.5 hour, 2 3/4 hour films. It's a nice little 94 minutes. A great introduction to him, even though it's probably atypical of his work. But I absolutely love it, and I'm not ashamed to say so. From 1967, who knows, it could be higher. I'm not going to talk too much about it, because I talk enough about it. It's The Jungle Book. I will be mounting a campaign to change the ending. Please let Mowgli be disemboweled, please. Number 6. A film I've always loved, even though it's always been underappreciated because it's a bit wacky. It's How I Won the War by Richard Lester from 1967. I think he described it as an anti-anti-anti anti-war film. Michael Crawford, John Lennon in his finest work. Forget all that Beatles nonsense. This is John Lennon's finest work. Roy Kinnear, Jack McGowan. Michael Hordern is just absolutely brilliant. Obviously, it's not everybody's cup of tea. I'm amazed it got made and released and anybody got it. Most people don't get it or didn't get it at the time. I think it's perfect, even though I know it's not actually perfect, but it's one of those films that if you show it to 100 people, maybe 12 might love it, but it's just so good. Number 5, taking the mantle from Le Samurai is my favourite Jean-Pierre Melville. Even though, again, to some extent, it's perhaps his most personal and his most kind of atypical. From 1969, it's Army of Shadows. I was tired of holding up the Melville set by Studio Canal, so I finally got my hands on a Region A Blu-ray. And of course the Region B is coming out from Studio Canal on the same day as they're releasing Powell and Pressburger's Small Back Room on Region B. So that's a day for double dipping on two of the best films ever. Yeah, this is just fantastic. If you're used to Resistance films that are black and white, Resistance films that are heroic and uplifting and perhaps a little bit jingoistic, you know, there's been ones with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, ones with Daniel Craig. Army of Shadows is not that. Melville was in the Resistance for a period. This is completely grey. Trust nobody, everybody can betray anybody. The slightest little mistake and you're dead, and your friends are dead. Lino Ventura is fantastic. Paul Maurice from Le Diabolique. Jean-Pierre Cassel and Simone Signoret from Le Diabolique. Man, it's incredible. Again, it has that bluey grey. It's just an absolute masterpiece. I mean, I know obviously in this business we bandy the word masterpiece and genius about way too much, but Army of Shadows is one of those films that you can call a masterpiece and with a perfectly straight face. Just a phenomenal piece of work. Speaking of phenomenal pieces of work, a film from 1960 about an obsessed young man who does terrible things to women, made by a master filmmaker, probably the greatest filmmaker in British history. Of course it's Peeping Tom and Michael Powell, which for all intents and purposes ended Michael Powell's career. All those critics who wanted it flushed down the toilet. And then once they'd successfully ruined his career and after he died, those critics then went, oh yeah, it's actually quite good. Yeah, this is phenomenal. You actually care for the killer, which is one of the reasons it was problematic. It's not only a film about a sociopath, it's a film about the camera as a murderer, the audience being complicit in those murders, we ourselves, the camera is reflected at ourselves. That cover is appropriate because the camera is staring back at you. We are the camera and we are killers. At number 3 from 1961, probably, I don't have all the facts, but probably the film that got me into Japanese cinema and into so many wonderful, wonderful films. My life wouldn't be the same without Japanese cinema. And that's Kurosawa's Yojimbo. This is a Criterion DVD. and the Criterion Blu-ray. Again, from the moment the dog carries the hand in, I mean, Toshiro Mifune's scratching and shrugging his shoulders, that theme music, Nakadai with his gun, it's just absolutely wonderful. A story that has been told so many times before, just like one of Kurosawa's films from the 50s, which may appear in my 50s list. Just seminal, inspirational, influential, just devastating shot composition, frames within a frame within a frame, use of the camera, high and low, pardon the pun. Yeah, just seminal. Now, number 2, number 1, you can guess. Number 2 was a film that maybe for the first 40 years of my life is probably the film that I watched the most, even before I knew what a good film was, or things about shot composition and music and editing and all of that. But it's The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, a western that I thought would never be surpassed, but it was. Still probably the best film ever made, with 3 characters who respect each other, respect each other's game, but would happily kill each other without thinking about it. It's has that wonderful sadism that we all love, and of course it's not lost the fact that the good kills more people than the bad does or the ugly does. Obviously the Morricone score, freaking iconic. Yeah, the number of times I watched this before I was 20 was absolutely obscene. But it's just so good. Lee Van Cleef, come on. But a film that's about to get a 4K after all these years, a film that I'd heard of, but for some reason it was never shown on television. It was always the Dollars trilogy. And then BBC Two did a Western series, and this was featured on it. And again, I'd read about the introduction, the opening scene. I'd read about how amazing this film was. Obviously, I absolutely adored The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. So could this possibly surpass it? And it does. It's Once Upon a Time in the West. Now, I do think The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is more fun. It's probably more sadistic fun, if you like that kind of thing. But Once Upon a Time in the West, I think, is the better film. Just seminal performances by Claudia Cardinale. Obviously, Henry Fonda is a bad guy. Just genius. Jason Robards, everybody's favourite lovable bad guy. And Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson, like an angel, with his squinting eyes and his harmonica. Set piece after set piece. Characters that you actually care about, even though they might be quite bad. Just perfect scene after perfect scene after perfect scene. Both The Good, the Bad and the Ugly and Once Upon a Time in the West are examples to certain other people that make long films but don't make them as great as they are, of how to make great long films that you don't get bored with. Just add great scene onto great scene onto great scene onto great scene for 162 minutes. That's all you need to do. Yeah, if you told me when I was even in my 30s that The Good, the Bad, the Ugly would be overtaken by another Western, I would have called you crazy. But that's the beautiful thing about cinema. That's why I continue to watch films that I haven't heard of. That's why I continue to go down rabbit holes, because the next film that I watch could be my favourite film of the 60s or one of my favourite films of all time. And that's the beauty of doing this channel. That's the beauty of reading your comments, because your recommendations are often fabulous. I didn't want to do a separate video, but I have recently passed 1,000 subscribers. Obviously, as soon as I say that, 10 people unsubscribe. But it's mind-blowing to me that that number of people have pressed that button just to listen to my rambling nonsense. It's pretty humbling and pretty moving, especially as someone who not many people listen to in the real world. It is actually pretty humbling to have that many people press a button, and I've met so many wonderful, funny, informative, maybe not completely intelligent, but knowledgeable people, and I just want to thank each and every one of you for watching these videos and putting up with my low quality videos. It's pretty humbling, special and moving. So all of you, don't change who you are. And thanks very much for watching, and hopefully you'll join me, if it hasn't put you off, for my favourite 25 films of the 1950s, which will be coming hopefully relatively soon. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments your favourite films of the 60s. And as I say, please join me for the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and the 20s. Am I doing the 10s? I don't know. But please do join me for the 50s. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, as 10 subscribers unsubscribe, saying farewell